Well, with just 19 days until the midterm elections, President Biden is back in Pennsylvania touting his infrastructure bill.
Mr. Biden has been hitting the campaign trail hard this week. Yesterday, he addressed gas prices, announcing plans to release 15 million barrels of oil from the nation's strategic reserve.
On Tuesday, the president pledged to send legislation codifying Roe v. Wade to Congress next year. He also promised to veto any national abortion ban that comes to his desk. And earlier on Monday, President Biden also hailed his student loan forgiveness program. Applications are now being accepted with the hope of canceling up to $20,000 in debt per person.
Earlier today, the president kicked off his swing through Pennsylvania with a stop in Pittsburgh. He spoke about the impact of the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
For too long, we talked about building the best economy in the world and the best infrastructure in the world. We talked about asserting America's leadership. We talked about the best and the safest roads, railroads, ports, airports, and so much more. But now we didn't do it. We're finally getting to it. We're getting it done.
CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now from Philadelphia.
And we also have John Delano, money and politics editor for our CBS station in Pittsburgh, KDKA. Ed, let's start with you. The president is touting the infrastructure plan as part of this week-long campaign of hitting all these topics that are important to Democrats. How much do you think that this is going to help the Democrats gain any traction in these midterm elections?
It's a good question. He's in Pittsburgh first today. He's coming here to Philadelphia later for a fundraiser with John Fetterman, who you heard him mention there. All of this designed to get him out there talking about the issues that the White House understands from polling, from their own work, are of utmost importance to voters right now, but also what he believes Democrats should be running on. He believes this infrastructure bill is a huge accomplishment and one that, involves a lot of money, involved bipartisanship, is designed to fuel the economy, but really isn't going to be seen or felt by most Americans probably for another year or two. They go back to the Fern Bridge there in Pittsburgh that fell apart back in late January, the Fern Hollow Bridge that fell down on January 28th, right as he was planning to go to Pittsburgh, as an example, one is now being quickly rebuilt. And he says he'll come back and walk on it once it is. But there are going to be airports, seaports, rail stations, highways all across the country that are going to get expanded or rebuilt in the coming years with money from this bill. It's just not happening by November. And so I think he's trying to get out there and say, look, this is one of the things we did as Democrats working with Republicans. It's the kind of thing that we'll continue to do if you continue to give us control of Congress. What's different, and John can talk about this too, is that he's doing these as official events. He's not doing them as campaign events. Typically, we've seen, especially his two most recent predecessors, Barack Obama and Donald Trump, go out and hold campaign rallies, legit campaign rallies, bunting and all, with the candidates who want to be seen with them. This president, he said earlier today before leaving the White House, he's done about 15 of them. Well, okay. And they've been mostly in safe Democratic areas. Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Colorado, California, Oregon. Places where Democrats are actually struggling in some cases, and it helps to have the president come to town so that the Democratic incumbent can say, look, this is what I'll continue to do. I'll work with this president. He's not campaigning overtly in this battleground state. He hasn't visited Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Wisconsin. And the simple reason is, politically, he shouldn't. And the White House understands that. And has said, we'll do whatever we need to help or not help candidates across the country win these races. And increasingly, he's being told, thank you, but stay away.
John, I want to turn to you and talk about Pennsylvania's Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. He released an updated letter from his doctor. He had a stroke recently, to remind our viewers, who said he is capable of working in public office. But has the damage already been done to his campaign?
Well, it's a great question. The letter is a simple one-page letter, and they called it a medical report. But if you've had a medical report on you or you've seen one, you know there are pages and pages and pages of documented, itemization of different things that you've had through testing and the like. That's not what this is. This is basically a letter from his personal physician who basically recounts that John Fetterman is up for full duty in work in public office. Also noting, of course, that he does have the auditory problems, the issue with respect to hearing that we've been hearing about throughout this campaign since Fetterman had the stroke. Does this put the issue to rest? Well, I think the bigger question is, do people care about this issue? How important is this? And I have to tell you that we've gone out on the street. I certainly talked to a lot of folks here in Western Pennsylvania, and there's no sense that they believe John Fetterman is incapable of being a U.S. senator because he had a stroke last May. So I don't think that this issue is quite as resonant as Dr. Oz might like it to be. I think Fetterman, because he's out on the stump, he is out there. I've known him for 20 years. The truth is that he's never been a great speaker. He was not a great speaker before his stroke. He's not the greatest speaker after the stroke. I just don't think this is going to be the big issue in this election.
Well, Ed, let's go back to another issue, which is infrastructure. President obviously focused on that, talking about the bridge, making that pledge to come back. Republicans are, it seems, more focused on the economy and crime as their main talking points. Not to say that the White House isn't saying that those are important, but what are you hearing from voters on the ground there in Pennsylvania?
Well, look, and John can back this up as well, given his deeper work here in Pennsylvania, but the economy is issue number one. That is why the president is, in essence, talking about it today, because in their view, the infrastructure bill that was passed, the money that's being sent now to states for these big projects are designed to juice the economy. And the argument that Democrats are also starting to make is you've heard Republicans say they want to repeal parts of this plan that was implemented. Or voted against it, in essence, the infrastructure plan. He also talks about the Inflation Reduction Act, which in some ways addresses economic issues as well because of all the funding for climate change and projects that will come from that, designed to bring health care costs down, another bill that Republicans are targeting or didn't support. So, in the view of the White House, it's a way to talk about the economy, but also to talk about the binary choice that they believe voters are facing. And yet voters have said repeatedly they're concerned about the economy, they're concerned about higher prices, and that's why you've seen the president this week touch on a bunch of those things. There was an announcement about cheaper hearing aids made this week through an executive order he was able to sign, so now you can buy them over the counter at a lower cost. The plan to forgive student loans is moving now, with tens of millions of people having applied. He's tapping the rest of a trough of gallons from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that he had authorized earlier this year and saying, look, that's also designed to help. And then he's talking about this legislation that's been passed already by Congress and saying, we'll do more of that if you reelect a Democratic Congress. That said, 68% of voters tell us in our most recent battleground tracker they don't think he's doing enough to bring down prices. They don't approve of his handling of the economy. So it's a bit of a struggle for this president. And the question will be, is it rubbing off on Democrats in this state of Pennsylvania, in that Senate race, and the governor's race, and a handful of competitive House races? Or can they find a way to get around an unpopular president and still talk about these issues in a way that voters think is compelling enough to send him to office?
John, I'll ask you the same question. The president's focused on infrastructure while Republicans are focused on the economy and crime. Which is more important there to voters in Pennsylvania?
Well, I think all the polling suggests that crime is a much more salient issue across Pennsylvania, and I think that's true out here. Although I do think that in the Pittsburgh area, the infrastructure issues are really critical. The president noted we are a city of bridges here in Pittsburgh, and there's no question that when a bridge goes down, it causes huge, massive dislocation among commuters, among residents, and the like. The Fern Hollow Bridge, where he is today, which collapsed surprisingly in January, getting it back up and running in less than a year is really considered a miracle by a lot of folks. And the fact that the president came the day of the collapse and is back now and just says he's going to walk across it when it reopens in a month or so. I mean, all of that is great news, I think, for people in this region. But, I want to reiterate something Ed said, because he's so right. This is an official visit to Pittsburgh. This is not a political visit. What does that mean? Well, as I looked at the crowds of people with him, the folks who are there are elected officials, not candidates. John Fetterman is there because he's lieutenant governor, not because he's a candidate for the U.S. Senate. Who's not there? We've got a tight race for the U.S. House to succeed Connor Lamb. It's a wide open seat. It's a toss-up seat. The Democratic candidate, Chris Deluzio, was not invited to this event. Why? Because he's not an elected official. And so there's a huge difference when the president comes to an area on an official event versus going to Philadelphia, where he's going to join Ed there not too long from now. That's a campaign event, as I understand it, a fundraiser. So clearly he could invite anybody he wants to those kinds of gatherings. There is that distinction. I think that's really important. Yeah. Ultimately, though, I do think crime is Trump's infrastructure. It may be unique to this region that we care a lot about our bridges.
Well, I think the idea of a bridge collapsing suddenly, as is the example there, is enough to make anyone want to make sure that their bridges are nice and safe and sound. All right, Ed O'Keefe, John Delano, thank you.